Hi everyone, I'm Sai Priya from Bṛhat, and I'm here today with Bhaskar Kamble, who is the author of The Imperishable Seed. I have the book here with me. Um, and I've read this book, and I thought we could have like a chat about the book and its implications. Um, and we're so glad to have him here today. He's joining us from Germany, and but I'll let him introduce himself a little bit about your background and about how this book came to be, maybe, and then we go from there. I have a few questions for you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sai Priya, for inviting me to your show. I'm really happy, for talking about my book and related things. So, yeah, my name is Bhaskar Kamble, and I was a theoretical physicist and did my PhD in physics from IT Kanpur in 2010 in theoretical physics. Then I worked for several years as a postdoctoral researcher in Germany and South Korea, and sometime in 2017-18, I made the shift to data science, and now I'm working as a data scientist in Berlin. So I was interested in mathematics during my school days already, and then in physics I was using mathematics very extensively for my works. And I never bothered about the history of mathematics and just assumed that it's the Greek origins, then taken forward by European mathematicians in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries. I mean, no, more like 18th, 19th centuries onwards. It was taken up further by European mathematicians like Newton and Pascal, and all these are the big names we hear today. And then this was it. And then I did not think much about that further. But somebody, once I just heard somewhere, like in my IIT days, one of my friends told me that the so-called Pythagoras theorem is known in the Sulba Sutras in the Vedas, and I just dismissed it at that time because I was trained to think of this as right-wing propaganda and Hindu propaganda, and so I just dismissed it and I did not take it seriously. But somehow when I was in Germany 2012-13, I started coming more and more into touch with I wanted to know things for myself, how what the situation is, what the reality is about because there's a lot of information this way and that way. So that way I wanted to sift fact from fiction, so we can say in these terms. So I was researching many articles, looking up many articles, came across one article by one John Playfair at the end of the 18th century. He had written 1790s or some such thing, where he was discussing some ancient Indian astronomical tables, and there he spoke about the so-called Pythagoras theorem being used in India before Pythagoras. So I was really impressed by this, struck by this, because coming from someone from Scotland, who has no connection to Hindu ideology, or who is miles away from Hindu right-wing ideology, right? So this was for me like a kind of proof or evidence that this is something, there is something more to it. It's not just propaganda.
Right,
And
right,
then yeah and then I just started reading about this more and more. And obviously this John Playfair's importance does not lie in the fact that he mentioned this, because the evidence of the so-called Pythagoras theorem, that is there in the Sutras, that's there in Sulba Sutras, is of course, like it's well known today. In 1875,
right.
Thibaut published the English translation of that, and so on. So it's a pretty well-known fact. So that's
Right.
how I started researching on this topic more and more.
So that's how you
And
got interested. And how did the book come to be? How long was your journey, and how did it actually come to be?
so I was, of course, very much discontented with the state of affairs, how how it is not known at all in the public discourse, in the Hindu mathematics thing. And at the same time, the Hindu society was known just for the caste system and caste discrimination, and this narrative was really for me very disturbing. And I thought that we have to really do something about it. That was also one of the motivating factors for me to read up the articles and collect knowledge. And then I started writing some blog posts here and there. I wrote a series of blog posts, and part of this information has gone into the book. And then I wrote and I was also reading a lot of other stuff like colonial narratives and concepts like universalism. For example, the books by Rajiv Malhotra I wrote. Being Different was a very stimulating book for me, because it spoke about many of the things which I was concerned about, and I saw being written them in black and white in front of me. These concepts were being described, which I were put into words. And then the writings of C.K. Raju were a huge also eye-opener for me, especially his writings about primarily the transfer of calculus from India to Europe, and also how this whole narrative of Greek mathematics was built. And So these were some of the factors. And then I wrote the first edition of the book, I think, I don't know, sometime in 2000 and I don't remember, maybe it was 2019 perhaps. And
Oh,
it was self-published. Yeah, it had also a
okay.
totally different title, History of Hindu Mathematics, What They Did Not Teach You at School and Why. This was, I think, the title of that, roughly speaking, self-published on Amazon. And yeah, and this D.K. Hari and Hema Hari
Hmm.
from Bharat Gyan Foundation,
Yeah,
they were kind enough to write a foreword for my book, and they also, yeah, publicized it and so on. And then I gave this draft to Sankrant from Garuda
hmm.
Publications, because D.K. Hari, he put me in touch with Sankrant from Garuda
Right.
Publications. Right, and then with Sankrant, he was very much actively involved in the editing process of the book. He gave me a lot of nice inputs on how to restructure the book, very nice editorial inputs, and also a lot of tips on what content I could add. So I've researched a lot on the kind of the tips that he was giving based on that, and uh, this is how, like, this it took the shape that it is in now. Yeah.
That's amazing. I'm glad, I guess, you found, I think, the time and the energy to actually put all of this together into a very accessible resource, because I think that's one thing that's also not there. If this information is just out there in like disparate bits, I think no one
Yeah.
really pays attention to it. And it's definitely something that people have not written about till now. So I mean, they've mentioned it, but I don't think, again, it's like compiled in a form like this. So I feel like for that reason, I think it's a critical work. And I'm gonna jump in. I have one question before I jump into the questions that I've written down for you, which is, are you named after Bhaskara, the mathematician?
Yeah, indeed, yes. In fact, my
Yeah.
grandmother, yeah, maternal
Uh,
grandmother, she named me after Bhaskaracharya, and I have also dedicated this book to her, to my grandmother, who named me
what
after
a
the.
beautiful coincidence. I'm so glad. Yeah. It's lovely.
Yeah,
That's lovely. Yeah.
yeah. It's
So
there
you're
actually on the
kind of
dedication
walking,
card.
kind of
Was
reviving his work in a way.
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah, I think the first question I have is about the first part of the book, or the section that you titled "Influence of Hindu Philosophy on Mathematics," and I really thought that it was an amazing sort of thread to add to the book. It's not just, you know, dumping information, but you've actually tied it together with the Hindu worldview and how that works. So, and the, kind of the development of mathematics, sciences in general, and what was the approach towards of Hindus towards science and all that. So, can you elaborate a little bit and talk about why you felt the need to kind of bring this element in into your book?
yeah. So, so I think, yeah. So one of the things I noticed in other books on his history of mathematics, when they spoke about Hindu mathematics at all, they would speak of it as a separate phenomenon, as a which has no connection with bigger the background behind it, and this would always worry me. And now in hindsight, when I think about what used to worry me about that, I now realize that it was always this tendency to treat it as an isolated phenomenon, was was in fact motivated by this wish to show that as just a precursor to the perfect Western mathematics. And so this was the thing which
Right.
bothered me.
Right.
And yeah, because this mathematics is shown as just in the context of Western mathematics. In hindsight,
Right.
it is shown how it was set, with.
Right.
And that does not and that obviously at the same time, apart from portraying it as a precursor, or kind of an inferior version of the more perfect mathematics, it also ignores the total the Hindu civilization's knowledge framework, how knowledge is framed, and the philosophical framework of the Hindu civilization. So it totally
Right.
yeah, ignores that also.
Right.
So I
And obviously the traditional setup and all of that that comes with it. I think uh, just the worldview being rooted in dharma, religion, and all of that, despite it being the scientific inquiry, I
yes,
think it makes, yeah,
yes, exactly. Because then the impression is given that there was no scientific background or no scientific inquiries
right,
conducted in India, and
exactly,
whereas the truth is that the scientific knowledge in India is actually divided into two parts: para-vidya and apara-vidya. Whereas in the Western framework, it is almost exclusively materialistic. So what we call
right,
as apara-vidya can be said to be the Western framework of materialistic
right,
knowledge,
right,
and and right so these are some of the aspects I wanted to emphasize in the book, how this
right,
there is a deep connection of this mathematics to the knowledge
right,
framework, how it arose from the knowledge framework, how the knowledge framework itself makes it possible to have so many new insights. And yeah, I think these would be some of the points
right.
with
So I
regard to your
think
question.
just for context for those watching, I'll just read out a couple lines from your book. In Hindu society, the material sciences were not developed at the cost of acquiring knowledge of the self. The two were not mutually exclusive and, in fact, complemented each other. At the same time, because of the importance of Aparavidya, mathematics was not limited to creating abstract theoretical construct. On the contrary, mathematics was used in very practical applications such as navigation, astronomy, and commerce. And then you go on to kind of quote Mahavira from his Ganita Sangraha. So I think this is a very crucial element of the science of mathematics, why it had such a robust Guru Sishya Parampara, how it, you know, evolved into such strong works and such path-breaking works in many sense. A lot of mathematical theories that were never before heard and probably beyond the comprehension of some of the Western scholars that are working in mathematics. So I think it's very interesting to tie it to the not interesting. It's crucial to tie it to the Hindu worldview and tie it back to the roots of how the entire system facilitates this sort of scientific inquiry and how they were still traditionalists by all means. So I think that's a really lovely aspect of your book that I wanted to point out. Um, Again, I think you go on to say that the impact, especially in the development of the number zero and all of that, how Hindu philosophy itself played such a massive role in the theoretical construction of zero, because it's such a very novel idea if you think about it. Now it's kind of ubiquitous and common sense, but at the time it must have been a very, I think, theoretical, a concept that was like path breaking and very novel. So I think, yeah. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. So, like the idea of zero, together with the idea of things like negative numbers, and
Yeah,
how this whole system makes two things possible. When it's the representation of large numbers, no matter how large, with only 10 symbols, and at the same time makes possible complex calculations, arithmetic operations, the addition, multiplication, subtraction, division, also cube roots, square roots, this kind of things. This
yeah,
is something which is really not changed across the centuries.
right.
And in fact, there was there's a book by Tobias Danzig. So he says that if your son wants to learn addition and multiplication, addition and subtraction, then a university somewhere in Germany would be fine. But if he wants to learn division and multiplication, you better send him to a university in Italy. So that sort of things. So it took really
Okay.
centuries for this knowledge to become accepted and mainstream in Europe.
Yeah,
So this again, if there is this tendency of European scholars to claim that mathematics is universal and all that, but if it is universal, why do some ideas develop in one place and take ages to be accepted in another place? So so actually, this is also another aspect. This whole notion of naming mathematics as universal is also very how do you say? It ignores the contributions like other civilizations, because
right.
implicitly it assumes that this universal is also Western at the same time.
Yes, yeah. I think that's the problem in other spheres also, say law and in many religion, especially, so the secular world, in its universalizing tendencies. it contributes to the erasure of other civilizations and their concept of a similar structure or framework, in and that universalization itself is a hegemonic sort of force, which is felt exactly like you said in mathematics.
Exactly. This is, yeah,
Right. So I think that brings me to another question I had about this aspect, which is among the world's civilizations and the specific history of their mathematical traditions. The history of Hindu mathematics is notable for its absence from academic discourse. And you've researched and written a lot on this to address the lack, here. So, how do you think this can kind of change in the sense that, see, just yesterday, I think I was in class and my professor said Arabic numerals. And immediately I was angry because why should we be saying Arabic numerals? Why is it so ubiquitous? Why is it so unfair? So I was just thinking about that. So I think even in academic discourse, there's this huge gaping lack, where Hindu mathematics is notably absent and not credited. So what do you think about this? How do you think this can be fixed?
yeah. This is actually really interesting when your professor said Arabic numbers, because this Arabic numbers was the name given by the Europeans when they came across the
Yeah,
works of Al-Khwarizmi,
yeah,
whereas he had himself called them as Indian numbers,
right,
and these Europeans, they called it as Arabic numbers when they came across that for the first time. And then it is so funny that the Indians today, they call them as Arabic numbers as well.
right. Yeah, it's
Right?
it's yeah, it's
It's an absolutely,
unfortunate that, yeah, it's a travesty. So we don't.
yeah.
I feel like even if we knew, because the consensus says Arabic numerals, we're not even going to change our ways. No one wants to. Again, like you said, it's labeled as Hindu conservative propaganda. And on some level, no one wants to switch to saying Hindu numerals. So maybe just saying numerals is better, but Arabic numerals, and he said it twice, and I was just shaking my head. I was like, why is he doing this? Should I go talk to him after? He'll think I'm crazy. So,
Yeah, I had a
so
similar experience when I was in Germany, in Berlin. I was learning a German language course in Berlin, and our teacher, he was teaching us numbers in German, how they're expressed. So he was talking about the Roman numbers, and he was speaking about the Arabic numbers. And then I actually pointed him out, because in Germany there is not this resistance. If you point this out in India to people, they will think that you are a Hindutva person, whereas your
yeah, yeah,
positions have to do nothing with Hindutva or whatever things.
yeah,
So he was actually quite surprised, and he was quite open to it, and this was like for me also a very interesting experience. So so coming to your question, I think the thing is that most of the people at the popular level, at the everyday level, they just follow whatever the consensus is, or whatever the main narrative is, like sheep, to be very honest, without thinking too much about things. So about that, this is and I think it's also convenient to follow the mainstream narrative. You will not stand out, you will not be called out, and so it's easy to go along with the flow. So but I think for Indians, and for anyone in general, I think it's a very important point to keep in mind that this is easy in the long run, but in the long run it leads one to total yeah, I mean, really bad things, in the sense of this is how narratives are built on lies, and then it has a huge historical implications.
right.
So right,
And we
so
won't see it change unless there's some actual tangible change at the lower levels as well, I think. Not just in the academic world, right?
yeah, exactly, at the lower level, like at the individual level, people should realize that. And at the
Right.
same time, I would also really think that it's also the duty of the state, the government, to take this into account, to carry out action which is relevant to these aspects. Because as an individual, you can do only so much.
Right.
I write a book, it will, some people will read it, and then that's the end of the story. But then what, the real change can be brought about only by the people who are in political power, right? And
Right.
if
Right.
so if those people are concerned more with I don't know, yeah, getting votes, or yeah, these sort of things,
That
then
won't change. That is not going to change. Yeah,
yeah,
true.
exactly.
Yeah, I get it. I understand. I think there's
And
no institutional change that we can see.
yeah,
There's
and
no,
I'd also like to hear mention, there's other aspects like if you want to make it part of the main discourse, then we really have to be bold about it in the sense that we should
right,
speak our story, which comes
right.
from, yeah, which belongs to us, and not try to
Yeah,
water it down or dilute it just to please
that's true.
maybe the mainstream narrative people, or maybe the the potential Western readers of your book, you
Right.
know. So this is the thing that one has to
Yeah.
also keep in mind. So I remember once you had shared one very interesting book by one fellow called Castra, Impressing the Whites. It was a really funny book,
Mm,
but maybe you remember
okay.
that?
I don't. It must have been a while back because
Yeah, okay, because there he speaks about
yeah,
authors
yeah.
like Salman Rushdie and everyone who, write for
Oh, right. Yeah,
predominantly
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I
Western
remember
audience.
that.
Yeah,
Right.
and he has titled it very provocatively Impressing the
It's
Whites.
very funny. Yeah, true,
Yeah,
true.
right.
So
And
there's this class of authors especially that kind of write about India, but it's nostalgic and romanticized, and it's for a very white audience or a westernized Indian mind. It really, has loses connection with what it is. So I think, yeah, generally, being not being afraid to tell your story is definitely one thing. And again, there's a lot of racism against Indians, a lot of different sort of biases against Indians in general. And I think also now that Hindutva has actually blown out of proportion some older achievements, like claims about planes from the Ramayana and stuff. That stuff kind of puts people off to the whole
yeah,
thing. So I think it's kind of like the boy who cried wolf. If you
yeah,
talk about everything, then it just becomes unbelievable at some point. Like how can you be
yeah,
responsible for so much? So I think somewhere we need to kind of get a grip on reality and kind of frame it in such a way that it's palatable and accessible, and at the same time kind of staking our ground and getting our foot in the door, getting the credibility and the credit that we deserve. So I think generally it's not about credit in the world at large. Also, it's more about our school children and everyone else kind of knowing these things about yourself, so that they also have a different perspective on what they learn now that mass media is westernized and everything they learn is westernized. I think the perspectives shift a little bit. And yeah, who knows, they might take up research if they kind of know these things. And if they never are exposed to these things, then how do we have scholars that take these forward?
exactly. There were so many scholars, also in the 20th century, whose works I have depended on, K.S.
Right.
Shukla and yeah, Beena Chatterjee. I mean, they also had to go through the odds of going against the mainstream narrative, uh, and this is how yeah, I mean, exactly. And
Yeah, true. I agree. I think we just go forward a little bit. Um, oh yeah, can you just, because I think it's one of the most uh, common uh, things or theories that we see around. I'd like you to talk about the Pythagoras theorem a little bit and tell us about how it is related to the Vedic yajna and how altars were constructed and what the practical implications of this were, and kind of tie it to again the ideas that we discussed, how geometry was very linked to altar construction and how the entire science came to be because of this.
this is actually I was really yeah, I find this idea of this I mean this topic of the Pythagoras theorem to be really very interesting because yeah, for one thing, the so-called Pythagoras theorem is one of the most important theorems in mathematics. It is used in, like, yeah, everything. It's the
Everything, yeah.
foundation of, yeah, it's the
Yeah,
foundation of, a lot of mathematics that we see.
right.
Then even this thing, the so-called Euclidean norm in mathematics, for example, is based on that. So now the thing is, you know there is actually, to begin with, there is actually absolutely no evidence to link Pythagoras with this so-called Pythagoras theorem. because yeah, I mean, like, none of the authors who first wrote about Pythagoras discovering this theorem spoke about this theorem explicitly, and all these people, they spoke about it, wrote about this about, yeah, 500-600 years after Pythagoras had lived. And in fact, even this Proclus, he was one of the mathematicians, I think, in the 4th, 5th century CE. He also, like, indirectly mentions this point very carefully in his edition of Euclid's Elements. That he does not, yeah, he yeah. So there is actually, as mentioned, there is absolutely no evidence of linking Pythagoras to this theorem. Now, this has not stopped Western mathematical historians like Thomas Heath or Moritz Cantor from Germany. Moritz Cantor was in the late 19th century. Heath was in the 1920s. To stop this has not stopped them from crediting Pythagoras with the so-called theorem. And there's also mythology which has continued all across the decades and even till today. Like, even in Twitter, if you see at some prominent mathematics accounts, they speak about the so-called Pythagoras theorem, and all the popular mathematics books which speak about this. So actually, this is actually one of the foundational lies of Western mathematics, or Greek mathematics. And then you have this, this whole idea of Euclid, Archimedes, and everything. All these people, ancient Greek mathematics. So this is the original lie, you can say, from which it's all built. And Euclid, Archimedes, we hear so much about them. It's like taken to be as the incontrovertible truth about how mathematics, developed. But the fact of the matter is that there are no original, manuscripts linking, connecting to Euclid or Archimedes. All of the manuscripts that are attributed to them come from at least around the 5th century CE, from like, the Greek of those times, where there you had the Neoplatonic philosophers who were suffering at the hand of the Christians at that time. And most of them actually, they come from the around the 9th and 10th centuries Arab world, Arab Persian world. So, like, most of them, I think, only are translations from Arabic and Persian. So you can see there's almost a millennium separating the time of Euclid and then
Right.
the appearance in the Arabic world. So
Right.
so the Pythagoras theorem is the one of the original kind of myths that we happen to see. And
Okay.
now and yeah, and then as mentioned, this theorem is so-called theorem is mentioned also in the Sulba Sutras. So Pythagoras was supposed to have lived around 500 BCE, and
Mm.
the Sulba Sutras, which are part of the Vedas, they are conventionally dated to 800 BCE by Western scholars.
Right.
Now,
Right.
for me, it's like, I am very much doubtful about this date, about 800
Mm.
BCE for the
Yeah.
Sulba Sutras, because, yeah,
Right.
because we actually, there is a lot of I would say, like, opinions, or at least many
Yeah.
knowledgeable people do speak about that, the Vedas are much older than 800 BCE. So this is a very important point
Right.
which I would like to
Right.
investigate further.
Right.
And so they were in the
So
Sulba Sutras.
regardless of the date, though, I think they still preceded Euclid by
Pythagoras,
Sorry,
by
Pythagoras
300
by about,
centuries,
right, yeah,
3 centuries, sorry, not 300
three
years, about,
centuries.
yeah,
Right, yeah,
exactly, at the very least, yeah.
right.
So, and you also have to remember that, he's a lot of things said about Pythagoras are, you don't know whether it is true or not. But the one thing that is, there is absolutely no doubt about his teachings, is that he believed in the theory of reincarnation, of a life after death, the cycle of birth and death, and exactly the same idea as in Hindu philosophy, that yeah, if bad deeds lead to a bad life, like, the karma, the results, cause and
So
effect.
karma, yeah,
Yes,
right.
so this is one of the things that is for sure that is attributed to him. And so you see that this Hindu philosophy of birth and death,
Mm,
cycle of birth and death,
right,
and this mathematical theorem, they are
right,
both part of this Hindu tradition. uh,
right.
right. So and in the 1880s, one German Indologist called Leopold Schroeder, he wrote an article, Pythagoras and the Indians, Pythagoras und die Inder, in German. And he wrote a very detailed article, several pages, I think 40-50 pages long article, where he discusses this, similarities between Pythagoras philosophy and mathematics, between Indian philosophy and mathematics. And also, how Pythagoras had this very mystical, he attributed mystical properties to numbers in his philosophy. And then he makes his connection with the Sankhya philosophy in India, because And in Sankhya, it comes from the word Sankhya, which means number. So enumeration of the philosophic principles. So he makes these points in that very interesting article. But unfortunately, that article was totally ignored by one of the leading historians of that time, Moritz Cantor. And then this state of affairs continued. And then in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, you had the discovery of the so-called Babylonian mathematics by Neugebauer, and then this sort of everything becomes kind of attributed to the Babylonians. So this is also another
Right.
interesting thing we were discussing some
Yeah.
time back. Yeah,
And Egyptians and all of
Egyptians,
that, but
yes.
yeah, none of it
Yes,
to
there's actually
the
there's actually a
Hindus. Yeah.
very interesting history behind this. So in
Mm,
1875, this George Thibaut, he published the English translation of the Sulba Sutras in the Asiatic
mm,
Society of Bengal, I think.
mm,
And uh, and then when this was published, he did not give any dates. Thibaut did not give any dates. So this Moritz Cantor, he said that okay, the Vedas, they belong to somewhere around 100 AD or something, 100 CE
mm,
or something. And then his
mm.
theory was that okay, the Sulba Sutras, they were influenced by the Greek mathematics of earlier
Oh,
times. Okay,
oh.
and then
So
this he maintained this.
just refusal
Yes,
to even give
yes,
the
and then
benefit of the doubt. Yeah.
right, right. And then in
Right.
1884, this Schroeder sent him his article, but still
Right.
he wrote it in his book, that
Right.
I received this article from him, but I did not believe it. So I did not mention, I don't take it seriously. He wrote this. And in
Right.
1974, another German Indologist called Albert Burke, he
Mm,
published the German translation of, I think, Apastamba Sulba Sutras.
mm,
And then apparently this Cantor, he was convinced by the the dates of the Sulba Sutras as belonging to 800 BCE or something.
mm.
And then he, instead of saying that the admitting of the possibility that Pythagoras may have got his result from the Indians, he then invoked the Egyptian connection, that okay, he
Oh
may
my
have got it
God.
from the Egyptians.
Oh my
So,
God. So
so
yeah,
yeah,
so you mentioned these two German Indologists that probably, you know, had a lot of intellectual honesty and reported their findings and all of that. So I think not all apples are bad, but what happens is the mainstream or the ones with more power in the academic world kind of engage in a
exactly.
willful erasure of the Hindu contribution. So I think it's a very deliberate erasure of the Western world to kind of sideline Hindu mathematics. I think that's what I'm getting from this.
Exactly. Yeah, you're absolutely right that there are some people of integrity who
Yeah.
state the situation, but then they get sidelined by the mainstream narrative and the authority of some of the people, and then this is how it continues. And this
Right.
also continued later on with the works of Neugebauer when he spoke about Babylonian mathematics. That okay, the Babylonian. So in that also. He claims that the Sulba Sutras, they have been influenced by the Babylonian mathematics, just because there is a date of 800 BCE. And that's why I was also wondering how accurate this date is of 800
Right.
BCE, because there
So
is that.
how it came to be.
Yeah, because
Right.
this Neugebauer wrote in about 1940s his influential
Mm,
books. And and then there was this is how the matter stood for a lot of time. But then in 1960s and in 1978, one mathematician called Seidenberg, he wrote two very interesting articles on the Sulba Sutras and the origin of mathematics, the ritual origin of geometry, in these two articles, where he sort of makes really very interesting conclusions and why Neugebauer is probably wrong. So
right.
in fact, his conclusions in these articles is that both the Babylonian mathematics and probably also the Egyptian and the Greek mathematics of later times, they were influenced by the mathematics which was very similar to the Sulba Sutras, he says. And in fact, why it is not the Sulba Sutras themselves, he bases it on two premises. One is the Aryan invasion sort of theory, and the other is the assumed date of the Sulba Sutras as 800 BCE. So, but it's a very interesting conclusion nonetheless, because
Right.
it
I
speaks of,
think,
yeah,
yeah, sure. It actually is. I think the whole narrative around the Silver Sutra is also, even if the dating is inaccurate, I feel like there hasn't been, enough inquiry. And like I said, or like, and you said there's been a conscious sidelining and just the entire contribution. And in I think the academic world continues to do this. It's not just in the 19th century and 20th century when this was actually happening. Even now, I think, despite the information being far more freely available, and despite research and access to primary sources being far more accessible, I think the problem persists very glaringly in academia.
Yeah,
Right. So, I think so. We've talked about kind of the applied sciences being very linked to mathematics. I think especially geometry and in general, even a lot of different mathematical theories being very closely linked with religion. But now I want to, I think, go uh, to discuss algebra for a second. I think I'm going to read out a sentence from your book. You quote Narayana Pandita from 1350. You say, as out of Brahman is derived this entire universe, visible and endless, so out of algebra follows the whole of arithmetic with its endless varieties. And I think the title of your book also derives from this, which is the imperishable seed of like the Bija Ganita.
yeah.
So I'd love if you can talk briefly on why algebra is so crucial to in the corpus of mathematical history, and kind of a little bit on again how what the Hindu contribution actually is in this field.
Yeah. So yeah, actually, yes. The title of the book, "The Imperishable Seed," it is, as you rightly pointed out, it comes from the word for bijam, the seed, and actually it comes from a Bhagavad Gita verse where you have the phrase bijam avyayam from chapter
Right,
9. So 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 here actually in algebra one can see this close connection between the evolution of mathematics and its connection with the Hindu philosophical framework. So in the Hindu framework, for example, in the Bhagavad Gita, you have the division of the world into Vyakta and the Avyakta. So the Avyakta is like the unmanifest, which you don't see, where the things exist in a potential form, and the Vyakta is the concrete manifestation of that. So which takes on a form, a name and a form, and then yeah, from the so it's actually the avyakta which is the seed of the vyakta. So out of the avyakta comes out the vyakta. So this is exactly also the idea, this statement which was also given by Bhaskara too in his work on Bija Ganita. And and that's also one of the reasons why Bija Ganita algebra is known as Avyakta Ganita. So it's like when you have an expression. So for example, x plus y whole square is equal to x square plus 2xy plus y square. You can say this to be like the avyakta, and the vyakta could be any specific instance of this. So like for example, 2 plus 1 whole square is 2 square plus 4 plus 1. So that's sort of a thing. So this avyakta contains all possible such combinations which you can have. And similarly, if you have like so-called Pythagoras theorem, if you have a right angle triangle, you have a b c, c is the hypotenuse, so a square plus b square equal to c square. This would contain all possible right angle triangles in this one single line. So for example, the right angle triangle 3 4 5 would be a vyakta instance of this. So it's like the whole vyakta rises out of the avyakta. So this was also stated by Bhaskara, as I mentioned. And I unfortunately don't remember the exact Sanskrit verse right now, but this is basically the idea behind the title of the book, and also the the philosophical basis of algebra. And of
right,
course, the reason why it is important is that it of course allows you to state general mathematical results in the form of expressions, formulas. At the
right,
same time, it makes it possible for you to find out unknowns by
right.
yeah, denoting it with some symbol.
Yeah.
Today use the symbol x, but in Hindu mathematics they use the symbol ya. Ya would be like was a short form for yavat tavat. That means the quantity
Okay.
which is
So
to be found.
unknown, right? Okay.
Yeah,
So
exactly,
yeah,
the
isn't
unknown.
like just the Sanskrit, yeah, the
Exactly, the in
letter, the
the
Devanagari, right?
yeah,
Whatever
absolutely,
letter that they used, right?
yeah, exactly, yeah,
Okay.
the yeah, which we would used to do in the Devanagari script, they actually used ya, and then this would be the, like, the short form for yavat tavat, and this would be the x of those days.
Oh,
And they used to write exactly the the equations like we write today, with the only difference that they would write the left hand side above and the right hand side below, and this would be then the equality, and then they would solve the. So what is example, if you look at Bhaskara's Bijaganita texts or any of the Bijaganita texts, you will find absolutely no difference between the problems given in those texts and the algebraic problems given in, let's say, a class 7 mathematics book in school.
that's fascinating, actually. Yeah, that's very cool, actually, also. I think in that context, in like a classroom, I think this is something very interesting to discuss how ancient Indians represented algebra, how different is it from today. I think that would make it interesting. We don't need to frame it as, oh, we discovered this and we was kings, whatever the narrative is. I think this is a way to kind of make it engaging and kind of
Yeah,
bring people to the conclusions that we want and tell it as a story. I think that's always very seductive for people rather than like framing it as just history. So I think, yeah, I think
I
this is
totally, yeah,
fascinating. Yeah, true.
I totally agree. You can just have, this information boxes in textbooks
Mm.
where you can
Yeah,
have a section like how it was represented in ancient India, for example.
yeah,
Yeah, if you wanted
that's
to
true.
represent something like x square, they would write it as, ya and ver. So ver would be the short form for varga. Varga would be the, Sanskrit
Right.
word for square. So
Oh, that's yeah. So again, I think modern, norman is it called nomenclature or representations have changed a bit. I think it's also, but not so much that they don't resemble the parent, and that's what's very interesting over the millennia. How I think how crucial and how central these
yeah,
concepts have been in the expansion of mathematics and physics also.
exactly. And if you wanted to, like, say x plus 5, they would write it as ya, then ru, and 5. So here you see the
Okay,
word ru would be rupa, means a form. So which would refer to the fact that 5 is a vyakta, an instance, rupa. It has a roop. So
that's actually beautiful and quite aesthetic. I think. Yeah, it's. I think it's so elegant in its design, right?
yeah,
So I think another thing we already touched on this, but I think it's a recurring theme in your book, and I just want to bring it up again. You say a systematic bias exists when it comes to crediting Hindu mathematicians, even though they were the ones that pioneered algebraic methods that we just discussed. And I think the pain that you feel due to the Eurocentrism in the historical erasure is very felt. Especially, I think I really felt it when I read your book. But also something that stuck out to me was um the role of academics in the suppression of this history. I think they pretend to be kind of committed to the science and committed to the truth. But there's erasure, there's even condescension, and again, Hindus themselves don't really pay any attention to this, and there's also this broad narrative that Hindus don't care about proof and they just state things and leave. And uh, so, so what do you think about this? I think is it like a deliberate kind of attempt at discrediting what is different in the world? What do you feel as an academic that's in this field and you engage with scholars frequently and keep up with uh, the work that keeps coming out? So, what do you think about this?
so I think on the very top, not top, but in the everyday interaction with people which you have, people are of course concerned with their job, their careers, and things like what happened in history. Of course, is it's a really last
Right,
priority with most of them.
right,
Right. So, but unfortunately, the thing is that the historical narrative which has come through us through the ages is what sticks in people's minds. The
right.
narrative, right? So, for example, if you want to have some information on something, then you just, as a first effort, you go to Wikipedia or some such thing, and you can be pretty sure that that contains the, like, the most dominant narrative. Everything. So, So that ways, the question comes, how has this dominant narrative been shaped? So that is actually, as we had discussed some time back, it had its roots in the colonial times, when it was disadvantageous for the colonizers to show that the colonized people have a history of their own. In fact, the focus is on erasing their
Right.
history. Exactly. And then this is the dominant narrative, which sticks through the decades, and which continues to this day. And
Yeah.
in today's world, even in today's world, there is a how do you say, reluctance on the part of the academic world to credit Hindu mathematical sources. I mean, it's there in research journals and like articles, but not in the sense of that. That is really seriously considered, as for example, you have dozens of such incidents, like algebra is credited to al-Khwarizmi, numbers,
Right.
Hindu Arabic numbers, right? And I think the thing is that this narrative has become so entrenched in today's world
Mm.
that
Yeah.
that it's difficult to shake it, and most people just accept it without even questioning it. They accept it as a truth and just go along with their lives. So I think this is one of the issues I think that is there. Mm, yeah, I mean and the other thing is, yeah, one other very important thing is that, as we had discussed some time back, the Western scientific framework is based exclusively on a materialistic framework. There may be a
Right.
few scholars here and there who question the materialistic framework, who talk about
Right.
consciousness and those kind of things. But
Mm.
thing is, the moment you speak about the Indian framework, and that is
Okay.
fundamentally different to the Western framework. In the Western
Okay.
framework, even like emotions, even your consciousness has material origins. So
Mm.
that is actually, in fact,
Yeah, that's true. I think I get what you're insinuating. I think what the Western world kind of also in looking at Hindu texts also, uh, whether it's mathematics or any other field, they tend to separate the religious and the philosophical from the material, or the core of it. So when these two are separated and delinked is when they kind of are comfortable with it also.
yeah,
And what happens is when we kind of separate the two, that worldview is kind of lost. The worldview that actually produces these theories actually fosters scientific inquiry also. That is very lost. I think the entire when the approach and the lens is different, it kind of is not conducive to uh, acceptance of these things.
yeah. Also, when you separate it, these two aspects which you just mentioned, the separation makes it easy to
Right,
show the Hindu mathematics as a precursor to the more
right,
perfect Western mathematics, as we had just
right,
discussed some time back.
right. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think
And
I think
also,
that's a recurring thread also within other disciplines as well, and not just mathematics.
yeah, and I may also here mention that this narrative of Greek mathematics is like so fundamental to the Western identity, right? That most of the Western mathematicians, they just will not accept it. The fact that there is just little scanty evidence when it comes to Euclid and Archimedes. So
Right.
this is one of the things. And I think also one of the problems is that it's that the Indians, they themselves, they don't care about these things so much. In fact, I had, yeah, maybe I will just leave out my personal experiences, because I will have to
No,
then
no.
drag.
Actually, I want to hear this. I want to hear maybe briefly. You can tell us
Yeah,
what
so
happened.
there is this one of the reviewers of my book. He had written an endorsement for me, Professor Srivastava. So
Mm,
it's on the back side of my book. So
mm,
he had shared my book, a post about my book on his Facebook account, and like he was really encouraging people to read that book, and it's really nicely written and everything. It is not at all like I thought it would be, and everything. This is what he was saying. It has a lot of evidences and it's not just empty air blabbering. So
Mm.
one of his acquaintances, he jumped onto this. His name is Dani, Dani. He is I think, or maybe was, I don't know if he's retired, a professor at TIFR, and he
Mhm.
jumped at, oh, this a book which talks about erasure of how can the history of mathematics be erased. He talks about Hindu mathematics, and also it has been erased. I'm sure it is some cock and bull story without any evidence. So,
Oh.
I was,
Mm.
really surprised, taken aback. Like, what is this kind of a reaction, to a very polite post? And so I, also replied to him that, just give me any evidence that it's a cock and bull story. You have to read the book. And
Mm.
he kind of just evaded the question and said something like, I will not waste my money on your book. If you want, you can send me the book and I will review it. And I thought,
My
it's like,
God.
yeah, I did not follow the matter
Mm.
further because it's like, I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
want to,
No, that's I think that's just behavior that
yeah,
again that they just
this is
refusal to.
exactly this personal attack on me is okay. Like, it's okay. I mean, like, it's not the issue here, because this book is not about
Mm.
my personal things and everything. It's more about the narrative and about bring the information to the people. But what also made me surprised is that he's a professor of mathematics, even at TIFR. He's from India, and this is the attitude that this fellow has. And he has also written articles on like some of the geometrical constructions in the Sutras. So
Mm.
he does have some connection with the history of Indian mathematics. And he has
Interesting.
also written an article on there is this thing called Vedic mathematics,
Right.
which is I think by the Puri Shankaracharya. It was promulgated, and I don't know when it was exactly written, probably in the 1930s or so. And there is a lot of confusion about this term Vedic mathematics. So people believe it's from the Vedas, but ultimately it turned out that he has come up with those sutras himself in this so-called Vedic mathematics. And he had written an article on this Dani about and as if it's some great discovery. But the fact is that one of the greatest historians of Hindu mathematics, K.S. Shukla, Kripashankar Shukla, who has translated Aryabhatiya, and tons of other works by Bhaskara and yeah. So he had already written a detailed article about this on the Vedic mathematics, much earlier. So on the one hand, I don't understand the the novelty of this, and secondly, this person has not written one word against this narrative of the so-called Pythagoras theorem. So, like,
Okay.
I'm giving this person just as an example. There are also
Mm.
other mathematics professors, scholars, like this fellow, and they are all fine continuing with the narrative of Pythagoras theorem, or but when it comes to Indian mathematics, there is a total reluctance, even to acknowledge that there has been some sort of a asymmetry in the
Right.
situation.
Yeah,
And
I think I feel yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, also the one other very interesting thing is that it's there is talking about this asymmetry. There is also this asymmetry in the evidence for the mathematics. So C.K. Raju has
Mm.
written about this extensively, and I think the word asymmetry in the evidence, I think I've taken from one of his articles. I don't remember, but for example,
Mm.
when it comes to Greek mathematics, the evidence is that they were smart, they were innovative, and so they must have created this mathematics. So even if there is no evidence or very little evidence, they become the creators. And
Right.
whatever comes in other civilizations, they must have taken from the Greeks, because the Indians, if you look at the works of John Mill, right? John Mill, who had written the history of British India, whom I have also referred to in my book. I always confuse it with his son's name, James Stuart Mill. He was totally different
Mm.
guy. But yeah, this John Mill, he had written in his book the history of British India. So he literally says these things, that the Indians were barbaric, they were uncivilized, and so how can they have come up with this kind of mathematics? So that is the proof that they did not come up with this kind of mathematics. So this asymmetry is there. So for example, we also spoke some time back about the Pythagoras theorem, and the Silva Sutras, how Moritz Cantor was claiming that the Indians got it from the Greeks by assigning a date of 100 CE or something. So these are also some of the things you see. It's just taken for granted that it, the Indians must have taken from the Greeks, or So this
Right.
sort of
Yeah.
asymmetry is there. And on the other hand, when you look at the issues like transmission of calculus from India to Europe, there suddenly the evidence, standard of evidence becomes very high. There you need to
Right.
have the, the last possible detail in the evidence
Yeah. So I
to
think
make
this
such.
misattribution, I think in the medieval age, I think it's probably understandable. Like I said, again, the access to some of these resources just wasn't there. I think right now, though, I think in this day, it's completely inexcusable. Most large libraries at most academic centers have access to digitized versions of many of these uh, texts. So I think right now there's really no excuse for misattribution and continued erasure. So I think that's a fair thing. Plus, again, Indian scholars somehow, like you were saying, tend to be more, uh, you know, stubborn about these things and
Exactly.
just, yeah, just
Sorry, yeah.
they're not going to go out on a limb to say anything, even if it's very well founded.
Exactly. In fact, I came across some recent articles written in the last 2 3 years or so, and they were by Western scholars who speak about this erasure of mathematics. In fact, one of the
Mm.
writers, I don't remember his name, but he is a computer scientist at one of the Ivy League universities in the US. He speaks about um, he actively uses the word erasure, like we are talking about erasure here, and he speaks about, for example, some aspects of Chinese mathematics. He speaks about some aspects of, I think, probably Pingala or Panini's works.
Hmm.
But it's really interesting that this recognition actually is coming from the West these days, rather
Right.
than from the Indians. I mean, I don't remember the sort of references offhand. I have them somewhere in my computer. I will, yeah, probably write about them at some point. But it's the Indians who deny claims of such erasure themselves. So it's
True.
like
Yeah.
the home of colonized minds.
Yeah. And just again, they're also fearful of Western rubbishing of these things. Again, it takes a lot for a scholar to be so sure in his work and his reading of things that so maybe it's just a matter of academic integrity and quality, it could be. But again, I think in general, I'd really say that Indians are closed off to some of these ideas than the Western scholars are. I think that's fair. And I think a similar phenomenon is seen in astronomy, like you talked about in your book also. Just the contribution, the massive contributions are not acknowledged at all because astronomy was a very highly developed science compared to where the West was at contemporaneously. And by those standards, I think India was far ahead. So I think similar situation is seen in astronomy as well. Do you agree?
Yeah. So, in fact, in the beginning, there was like recognition that, for example, for the works of Bailey, that the Indians had a long tradition of astronomy, and also even Playfair wrote about it in the like 18th century, end of the 18th century. But I think it was probably only after the works of Brahmagupta, Bhaskara, they started coming more into the Western world, that really the true extent of this began to be realized. Um, for example, Henry Colebrook, he in the first half of the 19th century, he he brought the the works, mathematical works of Bhaskara to in the open. And then slowly, when this these works started being studied more and more, you could see the extent of mathematical knowledge that was required for them to do their astronomy. Not only these huge numbers which are required in astronomical systems, but also things like things like, for example, algebraic algorithms which were invented, for example, by Bhaskara one, the I the not the yeah the Kutaka algorithm for
Hmm.
solving like linear equations with for integral solutions. So this gave rise to such sort of algebraic ideas also. And then the whole branch of trigonometry was in India, was developed as for as an aid in astronomical calculations. Uh, the concepts of sine, cosine, they all come from India, from the Hindu mathematical
Yeah.
tradition. And and in fact, this it's exactly the way, we use them today, except for some minor differences, some minor
Right.
technical differences, right? And if you look at also the detailed applications of these formula, for example, in how they use that to find out the locations of planets in the celestial sphere, the ideas of spherical trigonometry are used, and then yeah, the declination, altitude, etc. Of the planets are calculated. So that really requires a high amount of high level of mathematical skill and three-dimensional visualization. So,
Right.
and then
So
unfortunately, yeah,
where do you think kind of the link was lost? So I think these schools, a lot of different independent schools, and who are all obviously in, uh, contributing and adding to each other's works also on some level. Where do you think the link between or like the Guru Sishya Parampara and kind of the scholars, where did the tradition die out? Where I think it is attributable to the colonial system as well, but in
mm,
general, do you think there was a very concerted um, attack on these institutions? Do you think the adoption of the Western models and mathematical world on corpus kind of phase these out? What do you think went wrong? Because suddenly, we see very crucial and critical contributions like this, just the basis of trigonometry, and then I think we see a lull in uh, scientific progress and just building on these mathematical concepts. So where do you think we lost out?
uh, so I think that uh, yeah, it's India's history is not an easy history, right? You had the invasion starting from the seventh, no, from the 8th century, in Sindh and what is today Pakistan, and all those regions. uh, yeah, those obviously had their effects. I mean, you have even this guy Al-Biruni saying that wherever Mahmud of Ghazni's his armies invaded India, they were scattered like the Indians were scattered like dust, and all their sciences also got destroyed, and they have retreated to the regions where our presence is not there. And by that he meant obviously South India,
Yeah,
mostly. Then the Vijayanagara Empire of that time, and where the
yeah,
Kerala mathematicians were. I mean, this of course shows us, very um, clear indication that we need political stability
yeah.
for the knowledge systems to thrive.
That's true. Yeah,
And of course, as you mentioned, the colonial times had a very big role to play. This Macaulay's you know ideas of replacing all the language of medium with English, and basically phasing out all the traditional uh, systems of education. You don't have to actually actively destroy them. They will just die out if they
right.
don't receive
Yeah,
the support or funds. And
patronage, right.
yeah, patronage. And
That's true,
then
I
of course
think.
they decay out.
Right.
And
Yeah, I think political stability is one of them. And again, in an
yeah,
entire school of mathematicians, how many, unless foster them for generations and generations, how many
yeah,
geniuses will you be able to see? So I think the other thing is stability throughout centuries kind of produces
yeah,
works that might contribute if it's continued, and if it's again broken, I think we fail to see the same sort of breakthroughs that we expect.
exactly, you're right. It's not just time but also area, geographical area. And India was a huge land, of course, and there was contact between, let's say, the mathematical work of in one Maharashtra, for example. This would be studied in a totally different area in Ujjain, or in somewhere in Banaras, or somewhere in Bengal. And
Right,
so there was this links across not just space but also across times, because later
right,
scholars would write commentaries on earlier scholars. They would copy out the original text and write the commentary, separately. And yeah, so this tradition was long-standing tradition, and
right.
for over a huge area. And of course, once this, yeah, I mean, once the British came, of course, they took over the channels of communication, and once you have the channels of
Right.
communication, you can propagate whatever information you want to propagate.
Yeah. And then there's a very clear, obviously, the clearest interruption of the tradition of mathematical production would be the British, the advent of the British, and convent schools and English education and all of these things that obviously kill off
Yeah.
indigenous science and indigenous mathematics and astronomy and all the shastras actually that had a very living and robust, very vibrant tradition of their own, right?
Yeah, it actually reminds me of a sentence from the novel 1984 by George Orwell. He says, whoever controls the present controls the past, and whoever controls the past controls the future. So
Right.
it's somewhat along these lines.
Right. That makes
Yeah.
sense. And again, I think another aspect of it is in kind of the lacuna in current discourses. Also, from you mentioned in your book that there's this huge body of Sanskrit manuscripts that are just lying around in various repositories across the country and probably that are not digitized, not translated. So, do you think there's like a massive research project pending that probably the state should undertake that would really change the face of what we have today?
Yeah, for sure. Because yeah, these manuscripts, they are written in a script which is probably not the same as today's Devanagari script. So one
Right,
needs people who are experienced, who have knowledge about that, and then also people who have knowledge about mathematics. If you are dealing with specifically mathematical texts, or
right. So
respectively other
kind of a
fields of knowledge.
cross-disciplinary thing. So you
Yeah,
need mathematicians who know Sanskrit and Brahmi and older scripts and
yeah,
Grantha scripts and maybe even like local languages, right? A lot of scripts are written in
yeah,
the classical
absolutely,
languages also,
exactly.
depending
Yeah,
on the school, say Malayalam,
yeah, 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 absolutely. This
Sanskrit written in Malayalam and all that sort of thing.
yeah,
So,
Yukti Bhasha,
Oriya,
for example,
yeah,
was
yeah.
written in, yeah, by
So
Jeshtadeva.
we
Yeah.
need, I think we
Mm.
need that, we need these disciplines to sort of intersect. We need mathematicians and biologists and doctors and all other fields to kind of learn Sanskrit and look back at these things to kind of find these threads, right?
Exactly, because otherwise, what's happening is that, as in one is just limited to following what the West is doing, and recycling, the research work being conducted there,
Yeah,
and yeah, being a slave to a
there's no
certain
original, right,
and also being a slave to a certain to a framework, or belief systems, like
right,
implicitly, the materialistic belief system of Western science.
right.
So implicitly, saying that it is the correct
Mm.
one, and promoting that.
Yeah. So I think again, this is a matter of a lot of funding that's needed also because which modern mathematicians are incentivized to learn Sanskrit and look at manuscripts for a living. I think there needs to be interest for sure, but also massive state funding for some of these projects because they require a lot of dedication and a lot of time and you may come up with nothing even after a lifetime of work, but I think it still needs to be done. And some states, I think a lot of countries uh, who have this sort of no one has this sort of obviously history, but in case they did, I feel like you see a lot more importance, a lot more heed being paid to these things than we do in India. I think that's one very crucial difference. Uh, such a massive corpus needs active state sponsorship for these research projects and original work and rewarding original work in these fields. I think that's just missing on our side.
Yeah, yes, yeah, there are, for sure. I mean, I'm aware of some people who are doing this. I recently saw a video on the, I think, Atharva channel, probably one, I don't remember his name, but one person was discussing some Samhita texts of astronomy from the pre-Siddhantic period, so to speak. So one needs to channelize all these resources, all these
Right.
people, and give more incentives, and state funded,
Right.
should be more state funding, right? Absolutely,
Yeah.
because I think there is
Also,
not a shortage of talent or interest amongst the people. It
yeah,
is
yeah.
more a question of
True.
resources.
Yeah. I think the other issue that I find in not I'm not sure about mathematics because I'm not in touch with the world, but in academic scholarship in general in India, I think uh, there's a there's a tendency to kind of not show the same rigor that the West expects. And so when that same level of rigor is not there, say someone looking at, say, a Samhita text or something, they tend to state things without probably citing them. They state things as common knowledge. Um, or maybe they talk to a scholar and have a certain understanding. They don't mention the scholar's name there.
Hmm.
Which Western scholars all do, even if they have a conversation with a scholar, say a
Hmm.
Nyaya scholar, a Mimamsa scholar, if they got some insight from a source like that, even they are mentioned. So I think there's a level of rigor that is required for this sort of knowledge to be perpetuated, accepted, and taken very seriously is just not there. Uh,
Yeah.
our centers, including the IITs, just the scholarship that is there, just the standards are quite low, in my opinion, even now. Um, Very few are of like an international standard where they can be accepted by the scientific scholarly world. Uh, so I think that's one thing that's just missing. I think these centers of excellence um, need to
Are
kind of
you
up
speaking
their
about are you speaking about historical research and manuscript
no
research in
yeah
particular?
even yeah that too, but also even in general, especially manuscript research. So I say that because in manuscript research, uh, it's already difficult to convince someone, and then you don't have this sort of rigor which falls flat. So I think this sort of excellence is just not there uh, in this world where it's very difficult to kind of get original research being heard. I think it's very crucial that we kind of up the ante and up the academic standards that are in India, kind of like what China's doing in Hong Kong
Yeah. Hmm.
and other centers. So I think just centers that are of an international standard that follow the rigorous methods that they do. Not because we have to play the game now that they've set these standards. Now we have to play the game. We have to engage on the level that we can. We can't just be happy with kind of internal discourse, right?
Yeah.
So I think this is one of the things that I see, and I think it's missing, and we need far more intelligent young minds entering these things to kind of make a difference also, I think. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Sure. Yeah.
yeah, I
Like
think this
simple
is this
things.
has been my opinion rather than yours. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So I think another thing, I think we'll wrap up soon. Uh, One last thing that I wanted to touch with you was um, I think the book is written very lucidly, kind of catering to a larger audience. I think maybe a 15-year-old me would have kind of really loved something like this because I used to love math. I dropped math in 10th, but I used to love math. So I think I would have really loved something like this. Um, but I'm glad kind of the book is written in such a way that it's understandable, even if a school student picks it up. But I think my question to you is how do we kind of start incorporating this information, these discourses, narratives into present day curriculums? How do we kind of how would you envision or re-envision the education system to be incorporating these things? And what is the ideal scenario in your head?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that to begin with, of course, the yeah, I mean, in the school textbooks, the information which is actually propaganda, like regarding to, for example, caste system, or Hinduism being yeah, religion of discrimination, and other religions being the religions of egalitarianism, or equality. This kind of,
Yeah.
I think, before we do anything else, this has to be obviously taken care of, because I see several examples of textbooks in India which have this yeah, this sort of very problematic, very
Right.
dangerous things. So I think that would be the first step which has to be done, and only then, because you cannot speak about like, oh, it was a bad thing, it was a bad religion, it was a bad society, and at the same time give this opposite information that, oh, we had a great history. So I think this would be the thing. And then regarding the other thing, about how we can incorporate the history of mathematics, science, etc. In general, as we had just discussed, this information can be interspersed in the textbooks as information boxes on the side, and
Right.
so yeah, this is, and then one can have actually things like in science museums, in science centers which are there all over the country. We can have sort of yeah, exhibits on relating to Indian science,
Right.
and Indian mathematics, and kind of not propagate this myth that science is Western. Basically, this is really
Right.
this also has to be taken care of. Not just propagating your history of your science, but also dismantling this this notion that, okay, science is Western, because this whole science is Western thing actually comes from this, again, this Hegelian dialect of the civilization evolution, moving in the linear way, from some
Yeah, the
beginnings.
progress of
Yeah.
civilizations, and
Yes, and then
yeah,
it culminates in the the telos, or the the
yeah,
culmination of the West, and the other nations have
right.
to just copy along.
Yeah.
And so
Or
this
they're
is,
barbaric, or
or the
they're not civilized, right?
yes, so
Yeah.
exactly. So all the non-Western
Yeah, I think
civilizations
there's a right. There's a lot that we need to kind of change and counter. There's a lot of historical narratives that are entirely false, and
yeah,
there's massive, so much work to be done. We can't even imagine it. And
yeah,
I think that's why I mentioned this. I think the first step, again, the government kind of shows intent in its education policy, in its newer education policy, incorporating IKS and all of that. And Bṛhat, as you know, like we work, or our core team works with government on policy on implementation of IKS, which is Indian Knowledge Systems, in the curriculum.
mm,
So I think this is one of the areas where mathematics and the history of Hindu mathematics can't just be a course at like a higher level. I think it really needs to penetrate the education system, penetrate school textbooks, and maybe
yeah.
have like seminars for kids. And I don't know, there's a lot of again, I don't know the apparatus and what the resources that are available, but I think we can start somewhere. I think it's crucial that we do it.
I can do some brainstorming, and so off the top of my head, some ideas I get are, one can just write, like, articles for children's science magazines, or there, I think there are some children's science shows, probably. I think there this
Right,
information can be presented in science centers. I don't remember. I think in Calcutta there is one, and in Gandhinagar there are several science centers in India also.
right,
So in science centers, you can have exhibits relating to Indian mathematics. You can have
right,
astronomical instruments which were described in the astronomical texts of Brahmagupta,
right,
Bhaskara. Yantra
right,
Adhyaya. There would always be a chapter on them, and there is a lot of instruments I have described, sundials,
right.
and kind of make, yeah,
Yeah,
working instruments of those.
yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah,
these are
I
some
think
of the
there's a
things that,
lot in a universe that can be presented to children, just to introduce them to the world of Hindu mathematics. And it needn't be divorced from mathematics as we know today. It's a part of its history, and it just, I think, needs to take the place that it deserves in a sense. So I think there's a lot, again, that can be done. Museums and exhibits, like videos, like you said. I think there are all of these resources at hand, but again, no one really paying attention to what actually can be done. I think state impetus in this is like crucial. And I
uh,
think, yeah, I think it's difficult. I think we'll get there eventually, hopefully. And yeah, I think it's a complicated and kind of a sad state of affairs.
but I'm absolutely. I was not so much aware, that Bṛhat is involved in this education policies. I mean, I only very roughly, you had mentioned it earlier, but actually, it's a yeah, it's a really nice step that
Yeah,
you guys have taken. And
thank you so much.
because on the one
And
hand, the academic discourse is there, it's important, the academic discourse at the academic level, but
right,
on the other hand, it has to penetrate the
exactly,
uh,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
the
I think
everyday
no
life.
one can actually, we can't find people to take these things forward if it doesn't somehow affect and enter the education system somehow, at least be there accessible to children, as much as there's work out there in the academic world. The same thing with history, right? Unless it's actually accessible to someone, like tangible, I don't think anyone really will care to read, 100 books to get a little bit of information about certain things. So I think those things need to really and change, and probably they needed to change yesterday. But again, I feel like, let's see. I hope things are looking up, and I think we'll just wrap up here. Again, I love the book. I think, like I said, like a younger me also would have loved it. I think a lot of chapters that are in, say, like my math textbook are actually covered by your book. I think you touch on almost all the different aspects: trigonometry, algebra, astronomy, and all these things. So I think it's very interesting and well presented in that way. I think, so whoever's watching, I think maybe buy it and gift it to any math teachers that like school teachers. Maybe recommend that school children and some people in school, people study mathematics, who are studying mathematics even at higher levels, I think really should be encouraged to pick up the book. I think I'm going to leave everyone with that message. And Bhaskar, you can, if you have anything to add, please feel free.
Yeah, so I think that's it. I probably don't have much to add. It was a really nice discussion, and even while during the process of discussing, I also got several ideas on the fly, and I think I probably note them down and work on
That's
them
good. Yeah,
further. Yeah,
that's good.
and I'd
That's
like
good.
to, yeah, and yeah, I'm really also grateful to you guys for hosting me on your show.
No, no.
And
Thank you for coming and speaking with us. I think it's a great work, a great addition to, I think, work on our side, on the IKS side, and I think that's why we really wanted to speak with you. And so thank you for, I think, bringing this work into this world, and hopefully it can be taken forward, and brought to like actual fruition in ways that are impactful. So thank you so much, and I think we'll wrap it up here.
sure.